Welcome to the Academy for Modern Stoic, your channel dedicated to exploring the timeless teachings of Stoicism and their application in the modern world. Today, we'll delve into the life and legacy of one of the great reformers of ancient history, Solon of Athens. Solon of Athens, born around 638 BC, is often remembered as the poet-statesman who laid the foundations of Greek democracy. In a period of social and economic crisis, he stood out as a visionary leader, capable of uniting different social groups and implementing reforms that transformed Athens. Born into an aristocratic family that became impoverished during his youth, Solon had direct experience with the difficulties of the people, which influenced him to seek solutions to the social problems of the time. Athens, at the end of the 7th century BC, was marked by a profound social and economic crisis. The struggle between rich and poor intensified, threatening the city's stability. Given this scenario, Solon was named archon in 594 BC. In the context of ancient Athens, archon was a title of great importance, designating a magistrate with high-ranking political, religious, and judicial functions. There were different types of archons, each with specific responsibilities. Archon King. The oldest and most prestigious of the archons, he held important religious and judicial functions, such as presiding over public sacrifices and judging homicide cases. Polemarch. Charged with leading the army in times of war and overseeing the military training of citizens. Thesmothete Archons. There were 6 in total, responsible for drafting and reviewing laws, in addition to presiding over courts that judged cases related to family and inheritance law. Solon was named Archon Eponymous, a position of great power and responsibility. In 594 BC, faced with the serious social and economic crisis that was plaguing Athens, Solon was chosen to assume this position with the aim of implementing political and social reforms that would restore order and justice in the city. His main achievement was the Sysachteia, a reform that abolished debt slavery, redistributed land, and created a new class system based on wealth. Furthermore, Solon instituted a new, fairer, and more transparent code of laws, limited the power of aristocrats, created the Council of 500, and established the People's Court. These reforms laid the foundations of Athenian democracy, paving the way for popular participation in the city's political life. But how do Solon's actions and teachings connect with Stoicism? Although Stoicism developed centuries later, its principles of justice, moderation, and virtue resonate strikingly with Solon's reforms and poetry. Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium at the beginning of the 3rd century BC, emphasizes the importance of reason, self-sufficiency, and resilience in the face of adversity. Stoic philosophers such as Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius defended the idea that true happiness comes from virtue and living in accordance with nature. The Stoics believed that justice is one of the cardinal virtues, and Solon, in implementing his reforms, demonstrated a deep commitment to social justice. Sysachteia, for example, can be seen as an attempt to restore equity in a deeply unequal society. The creation of a class system based on wealth rather than birth and the introduction of a new, more transparent code of laws reflect the pursuit of justice and equality of opportunity, values central to Stoicism. Moderation, another Stoic virtue, is also evident in Solon's actions. By limiting the power of aristocrats and creating institutions that allowed popular participation, he sought a balance of power that prevented excesses and abuses. This moderation is fundamental to Stoicism, which preaches the importance of living in a balanced way and avoiding extremes. Solon was also a notable poet, using his verses to defend his political and social ideas and to exalt the importance of justice and moderation. His poetic work influenced generations of Greek thinkers and politicians, and his teachings continue to resonate today. Solon's poetry, with its reflections on human nature and justice, aligns with the Stoic tradition of using literature and philosophy as tools for introspection and self-development. In today's video, we will explore these connections in detail and understand why Solon of Athens remains a relevant figure for scholars of modern Stoicism. We will analyze his reforms, his poetry, and his legacy, and discover how his teachings can be applied in the contemporary world. Prepare for a fascinating journey through history and philosophy as we investigate the lasting impact of Solon of Athens and his links to Stoic principles. Birth and childhood in an impoverished aristocratic family. Solon was born in Athens around 638 BC into an aristocratic family who, despite their noble lineage, had fallen on hard times and lost much of their wealth. This impoverishment of his family during his youth had a significant impact on his life and formation. Growing up in an environment that mixed the prestige of nobility with economic hardship, Solon developed a unique perspective on social inequalities and the challenges faced by both aristocrats and the lower classes. Solon's childhood, marked by the loss of family wealth, provided him with a deep understanding of the economic and social difficulties that affected the majority of Athenian citizens. He was not an aristocrat far from everyday realities. On the contrary, his personal experience made him recognize the importance of reforms that could alleviate suffering and social tensions. This social sensitivity was crucial in shaping his future actions as a leader and reformer. The impact of economic difficulties on your worldview. The experience of growing up in an impoverished aristocratic family allowed Solon to see up close the consequences of economic and social inequality. He realized that wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority of the population lived in precarious conditions, facing poverty and crushing debt. This reality profoundly influenced him and led him to develop a worldview that sought justice and equity. Solon understood that to stabilize Athens and promote common well-being, it was necessary to implement reforms that balanced economic and social differences. He saw the need to create a system in which opportunities were more equitable and where citizens could participate more actively in the city's political life. His own experience of impoverishment and observation of the hardships faced by the people enabled him to become an ardent advocate of meaningful reforms. The social and economic crisis of Athens at the end of the 7th century BC. At the end of the 7th century BC, Athens was plunged into a deep social and economic crisis. The city-state faced serious tensions between rich and poor, which threatened stability and social cohesion. Economic inequality was extreme. While a small aristocratic elite owned most of the land and wealth, the majority of the population lived in poverty, often in debt and on the brink of debt slavery. The crisis was exacerbated by a legal and economic system that favored the rich and punished the poor. Small landowners often lost their property and were forced to sell themselves and their families into slavery to pay off debts. This desperate situation generated an environment of unrest and discontent, with the constant potential for explosions and revolts and civil conflicts. Given this scenario, the need for a leader capable of unifying the city and implementing structural changes became urgent. Solon emerged as this leadership figure, recognized for his wisdom and ability to navigate between different social factions. He was appointed archon in 594 BC, receiving extraordinary powers to carry out reforms that could resolve the crisis and put Athens on a path of greater justice and stability. Solon's reforms were not only practical responses to the immediate needs of Athenian society, but they also reflected his philosophical vision and his commitment to justice and moderation. By facing the challenges of his time, Solon laid the groundwork for Athens' eventual transformation into a democracy, setting precedents that would resonate through the centuries. Solon's life and historical context are essential to understanding the profound reforms he implemented in Athens. Born into an impoverished aristocratic family, he was shaped by the economic hardships he witnessed and experienced. The social and economic crisis of Athens at the end of the 7th century BC provided the setting in which he emerged as a reforming leader. Their actions not only alleviated the immediate crisis, but also established lasting foundations for justice and popular participation, principles that resonate with Stoic teachings and remain relevant today. Political rise and the appointment of Solon as archon in 594 BC. In 594 BC, Athens was facing a profound crisis that threatened the social cohesion and stability of the city-state. Tensions between rich and poor had reached a critical point, with the indebted population crying out for relief and aristocrats resisting any change that might threaten their power and wealth. It was in this tumultuous scenario that Solon was appointed archon, receiving extraordinary powers to implement reforms that could heal Athens' social and economic wounds. Solon's choice as archon was not random. He was already known for his wisdom, integrity, and diplomatic skills, qualities that made him a respected figure among both aristocrats and the popular classes. His appointment was seen as a compromise, an attempt to find a mediator capable of reconciling divergent interests and implementing changes that would be widely accepted. As archon, Solon had the necessary authority to introduce sweeping reforms, positioning himself as a true statesman and reformer. His first measures in preparation for the great reforms. Upon assuming the role of archon, Solon was aware of the magnitude of the task before him. His first measures were carefully planned to create an environment conducive to broader and deeper reforms. He began with actions aimed at easing immediate tensions and preparing the ground for structural changes. One of his first initiatives was the implementation of Sysachteia, a set of measures that abolished debt slavery and canceled the obligations of many debtors. This reform was fundamental in relieving pressure on indebted citizens, restoring their freedoms, and preventing the perpetuation of poverty and slavery. In doing so, Solon not only mitigated one of the main sources of social discontent, but also laid the foundation for a more equitable and sustainable economy. At the same time, Solon introduced a series of measures designed to redistribute land more fairly. He reorganized the agrarian structure of Athens, creating a class system based on wealth rather than birth. This allowed for greater social mobility and gave citizens new hope for economic advancement, encouraging work and productivity. Solon also began to revise Athens' legal and administrative system, introducing laws that were fairer and more transparent. He established new legal and institutional procedures that sought to limit abuses of power and ensure that all citizens, regardless of their social class, had access to justice. Among these changes was the creation of the People's Court, which allowed more direct participation by citizens in judicial proceedings. Furthermore, Solon promoted education and political participation, encouraging citizens to become more actively involved in public life. He believed that a just and stable society could only be achieved if all citizens were informed and committed to the common good. To this end, he created the Council of 500, a legislative body that represented a wide range of interests and ensured that political decisions were made in a more inclusive and democratic manner. These early measures by Solon were crucial in stabilizing Athens and preparing the city-state for even more significant reforms. His careful and balanced approach allowed him to gain the trust of both aristocrats and the popular classes, establishing an environment of cooperation and progress. Solon's vision of a more just and equitable society resonated deeply with the principles of Stoicism, which emphasized the importance of justice, virtue, and active participation in community life. Solon's political rise and his first measures as archon in 594 BC were decisive for the transformation of Athens. By implementing early reforms that eased social tensions and set the stage for structural change, Solon demonstrated his skill as a leader and reformer. His actions not only resolved immediate crises, but also laid the foundation for Athenian democracy and a more just and inclusive political system. By connecting his reforms with Stoic principles, we can see how Solon's quest for justice, moderation, and popular participation remains relevant and inspiring today. Sysachteia, abolition of debt slavery. The Sysachteia was one of Solon's most significant reforms, abolishing debt slavery and canceling the obligations of many debtors. Before this reform, many Athenian citizens who were unable to pay their debts were forced to sell themselves and their families into slavery. This practice not only perpetuated poverty, but also created a deeply unequal and unstable society. Immediate social and economic impact. The abolition of debt slavery had an immediate and profound impact on Athenian society. Many citizens were freed from slavery, regaining their freedom and dignity. Furthermore, the measure helped to stabilize the economy, as people who were previously in debt and without resources now had the chance to start over and contribute to the economy in a productive way. The reform also reduced social tension, reducing the likelihood of revolts and internal conflicts. Comparison with Stoic principles of justice and equality. Sysachteia resonates strongly with Stoic principles of justice and equality. The Stoics believed that justice was a fundamental virtue, necessary for social harmony and the common good. By abolishing debt slavery, Solon promoted a more just society where people were not treated as commodities. This action reflected the Stoic idea that all human beings, regardless of their economic status, deserve dignity and respect. Land redistribution and creation of a wealth-based class system. Another crucial reform implemented by Solon was the redistribution of land, a strategic move that not only sought to correct economic inequalities but also transform the social structure of Athens. Rather than determining social status by birth, Solon introduced a class system based on wealth and the ability to contribute to the well-being of the city-state. This system categorized citizens into 4 distinct classes, reflecting their different incomes and responsibilities to the Athenian community. Comparison with the Stoic idea of equanimity. The redistribution of land and the creation of a class system based on wealth can be seen as an attempt to promote equanimity, a central concept in Stoicism. Stoic equanimity involves maintaining a balanced state of mind, free from emotional excesses, and accepting the natural order of things. By creating a fairer system based on merit, Solon sought to balance economic and social opportunities, promoting a more harmonious and fair society. New Code of Laws, transparency and justice in laws. In addition to economic and social reforms, Solon instituted a new code of laws that represented a significant milestone for justice in Athens. Before his interventions, the legal system was often manipulated by aristocrats for their own benefit, resulting in arbitrary and unfair application of laws. Solon's code aimed to correct this distortion by establishing clear and transparent rules, accessible to all Athenian citizens. This initiative not only promoted equality before the law, but also strengthened public confidence in the legal system, essential to the city-state's social cohesion and political stability. Reflection on the virtue of justice in Stoicism. The Stoics viewed justice as a central virtue, essential for maintaining social order and harmony. Solon's new law code, with its emphasis on transparency and justice, reflected these Stoic principles. By creating clearer and more equitable laws, Solon not only reduced abuses of power but also promoted a sense of justice that was crucial to social cohesion and political stability. Limiting the power of aristocrats, creating more democratic political structures. One of the most impactful aspects of Solon's reforms was the limitation of the power of aristocrats in favor of more inclusive and democratic political structures. Before their interventions, the nobles held disproportionate control over the political and economic affairs of Athens, exacerbating social divisions and undermining the cohesion of the city-state. Solon implemented measures that aimed to balance power, ensuring that political decisions did not favor just a privileged elite. He reorganized the political system to increase the participation of ordinary citizens, allowing a greater diversity of voices to be heard and represented. This democratization not only strengthened the legitimacy of Athenian institutions, but also promoted a sense of collective responsibility among citizens, encouraging civic engagement and political stability. Discussion on moderation and the need to balance power and responsibility. Solon's approach to limiting the power of aristocrats and establishing more democratic political structures can be understood in light of the Stoic virtue of moderation. For the Stoics, moderation was essential to avoid excesses and maintain a harmonious balance in all areas of life, including politics. By redistributing power more equitably among Athens' diverse social strata, Solon ensured that no one group or class disproportionately dominated the political landscape. This not only promoted a more just and inclusive environment, but also strengthened the stability of the city-state by mitigating tensions between different social groups. The creation of a political system where the participation of ordinary citizens was valued and encouraged reflects the Stoic philosophy of shared responsibility and collective commitment. The Stoics taught that all individuals have a role to play in the pursuit of the common good, and Solon, by creating institutions that allowed this active participation, demonstrated a deep commitment to these ideals. Thus, Solon's approach not only shaped Athenian democracy but also offered an enduring model for how to balance power and responsibility in a society, a lesson relevant not only to his time but also to the contemporary challenges we face in governance and justice. Social Council of 500 in People's Court. As part of his democratic reforms, Solon established the Council of 500, a legislative body made up of representatives from all social classes. This council had the responsibility of discussing and proposing legislation that would benefit the entire Athenian community, reflecting the diversity of interests and perspectives within the city-state. Furthermore, Solon established the People's Court, a judicial body made up of citizens chosen by lot. This court had the power to judge civil and criminal cases, ensuring that justice was administered in a transparent and impartial manner, without the interference of private or aristocratic interests. The direct participation of citizens in the judicial process strengthened the legitimacy of judicial decisions and promoted a sense of collective responsibility among Athenians. Importance of popular participation and collective responsibility relating to the community in Stoic philosophy. The creation of the Council of 500 and the People's Court highlighted the importance of popular participation and collective responsibility, central concepts in Stoicism. The Stoics valued community and active participation in public life as essential elements of a virtuous life. By involving more citizens in the political and judicial process, Solon promoted a culture of collective responsibility and civic engagement, which resonated deeply with Stoic ideals of community service and contribution to the common good. Solon's reforms were fundamental in transforming Athens and establishing the foundations of democracy. His actions promoted justice, equity, and popular participation, reflecting many of the principles of Stoicism. The abolition of debt slavery, the redistribution of land, the creation of a new code of laws, the limitation of the power of aristocrats, and the institution of the Council of 500 and the People's Court not only resolved immediate problems, but also created a more fair and sustainable. The relevance of these reforms resonates today, highlighting the importance of leaders who value justice, moderation, and collective responsibility. Analysis of Solon's poems and his political and social ideas. Solon of Athens was not just a statesman and legislator. He also distinguished himself as a poet, using poetry as a means to express his political and social ideas. His poems address themes such as justice, moderation, social balance, and the need for reforms. Through his works, Solon conveyed his convictions in an accessible and influential way, reaching a wider audience. In his poems, Solon often reflected on the injustices of his time and the need for change. He condemned the greed and corruption of the rich and powerful and urged citizens to value justice and social harmony. In one of his poems, he wrote about the importance of following fair laws and acting with moderation, themes that closely align with his political actions as an archon. Comparison between his poetic messages and Stoic teachings. Solon's poems share many commonalities with Stoic teachings, despite being written centuries before the formal development of Stoicism. Both emphasize the importance of justice, moderation, and virtue as foundations for a balanced and harmonious life. Justice. Both Solon and the Stoics considered justice an essential virtue. Solon preached justice in his poems, criticizing oppression and inequality, while the Stoics, such as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, taught that justice was crucial to social cohesion and inner peace. Moderation. Moderation is a central theme in both Solon's writings and Stoic philosophy. Solon advocated moderation as a means of avoiding extremes of wealth and poverty, promoting a more balanced society. The Stoics also valued moderation, teaching that happiness and virtue are found in the middle path, away from excess. Equity and equality. Solon used his poetry to promote the idea of equity and equality among citizens. He believed that everyone should have the opportunity to participate in the political and social life of Athens, regardless of their origin or wealth. This idea of fairness parallels the Stoic principle that all human beings are equal in value and dignity, regardless of their social position. The influence of his poems on Greek culture and politics. Solon's poems had a lasting influence on Greek culture and politics. They not only reflected his legislative reforms, but also helped shape the mindset and values of Athenian society. Through his words, Solon inspired generations of citizens to value justice, moderation, and civic responsibility. Literary culture. Solon's poetry contributed to the rich literary tradition of ancient Greece. His poems have been studied and admired for generations, serving as a link between politics and culture. He demonstrated how poetry could be a powerful tool for communicating complex political and philosophical ideas. Politics. In the political sphere, Solon's poems helped to consolidate his reforms and promote acceptance of his ideas. By using poetry, he was able to convey his messages in a more persuasive and emotional way, reaching a wider range of citizens and influencing public opinion. His ability to articulate his visions through poetry helped legitimize his reforms and ensure his lasting legacy. Influence on later philosophers. Solon's influence extended beyond his own time, impacting later philosophers and thinkers. Plato and Aristotle, for example, referred to Solon in their writings, recognizing his contribution to political philosophy and ethics. The way Solon approached questions of justice and moderation resonated with the philosophical teachings that developed in the following centuries, including Stoicism. Solon of Athens was not only a visionary lawgiver, but also a poet whose works reflected and amplified his political and social ideas. His poems addressed themes of justice, moderation, and equity, resonating deeply with the principles of Stoicism that would later emerge. Through his poetry, Solon was able to influence Greek culture and politics, leaving a lasting legacy that has continued to inspire generations. His ability to combine art and politics made him a unique and significant figure in the history of ancient Greece, demonstrating how literature can be a powerful tool for social change and the promotion of ethical values. Solon's voluntary exile. After implementing his political and social reforms, Solon chose to voluntarily exile himself from Athens for a period of 10 years. This decision was made to avoid the pressure to modify its laws, allowing them to be tested and Athenian society to adjust to them without their direct influence. During his exile, Solon traveled to many parts of the Greek world and beyond, including Egypt and Asia Minor. These years of travel were not just an escape, but an opportunity for Solon to expand his knowledge and contacts. He met with leaders and thinkers from other cultures, absorbing ideas and experiences that enriched his political and philosophical views. How exile reflected the Stoic practice of withdrawing from unnecessary passions and conflicts. Solon's voluntary exile can be interpreted through the lens of Stoicism as a practice of distancing himself from unnecessary passions and conflicts. The Stoics taught that wisdom and virtue often require a certain distance from worldly turmoil. Upon withdrawing from Athens, Solon demonstrated Stoic wisdom by avoiding being drawn into political disputes that could corrupt his reforms or generate unnecessary enmity. This attitude of Solon reflects the Stoic principle that it is important to maintain serenity and clarity of thought, moving away from intense emotions and conflicts that can cloud judgment. His choice of exile shows a commitment to moderation and tranquility, qualities highly valued by the Stoics. The importance of distancing to guarantee the impartiality of reforms. Solon's distancing was crucial to ensuring the impartiality and effectiveness of his reforms. By going into exile, he avoided the temptation to modify his laws under personal pressure or influence. This distance allowed his reforms to be evaluated more objectively by Athenian citizens and future leaders. Impartiality is a central virtue in Stoicism, directly linked to justice. The Stoics believed that true justice could only be achieved through clear and dispassionate judgment. By distancing himself, Solon ensured that his reforms were implemented without personal interference or selfish interests, allowing the changes to take deeper and more sustainable root in Athenian society. Furthermore, exile allowed Solon to avoid conflicts that could have arisen due to resistance to his reforms. Athens' physical remoteness prevented him from becoming an easy target for those unhappy with the changes, preserving his personal safety and the integrity of his reforms. This also gave the citizens of Athens the responsibility to adapt and implement the new laws on their own, without depending on the authoritarian presence of Solon. Solon's voluntary exile was a strategic and philosophical decision that deeply reflected the principles of Stoicism. Moving away from Athens, he demonstrated wisdom in avoiding unnecessary passions and conflicts, maintaining the serenity and clarity of thought necessary to ensure the impartiality of his reforms. His activities during exile, including his travels and meetings with other thinkers, enriched his vision and contributed to the lasting legacy of his ideas. Solon's distancing allowed his reforms to be tested and adapted by Athenian society, ensuring their effectiveness and durability. His stoic and visionary approach continues to inspire leaders and thinkers to this day, highlighting the importance of impartiality, moderation, and strategic distancing in the pursuit of a more just and balanced society. Return to Athens and the last years of Solon's life. After a period of voluntary exile, Solon returned to Athens to spend the last years of his life. His return was marked by a political and social context that continued to be influenced by the reforms he had implemented. Although he did not officially resume active politics, his presence was revered and his opinion continued to be respected by Athenian citizens. During his last years, Solon dedicated himself mainly to writing and reflecting on political and ethical issues. He continued to be a figure of guidance and inspiration to many, both for his pioneering reforms and for his poetic and philosophical writings. Reflection on his legacy and how he remained faithful to Stoic principles to the end. Solon's legacy is immense and is intrinsically linked to the Stoic principles that he incorporated into his life and reforms. To the end, Solon personified many of the central ideals of Stoicism, such as justice, moderation, and wisdom. Justice and equality. Solon remained an advocate of justice and equality throughout his life. His political reforms aimed to create a more just and equitable society where all citizens had the opportunity to participate in public life and share in the benefits of economic progress. Moderation and balance. The practice of moderation was fundamental for Solon, both in his personal life and in his political decisions. He understood the importance of avoiding excesses and seeking a harmonious balance between different social and economic interests. This principle of moderation was crucial to the stability and social cohesion in Athens during and after his time as archon. Wisdom and serenity. As a true Stoic, Solon sought wisdom and serenity in his actions and thoughts. His voluntary exile was a clear example of his quest to distance himself from unnecessary passions and conflicts, allowing him to maintain a clear and impartial view of his reforms and his role in Athenian society. Enduring legacy. Solon's legacy continues to resonate in history not only for the democracy he helped found in Athens, but also for the ethical and political values he defended. His influence endures as an example of how a leader can apply the principles of justice, moderation, and wisdom to bring about significant and lasting change in a society. Solon of Athens was much more than a legislator and statesman. He was a model of Stoic virtue and an architect of democracy. His return to Athens and his final years of life were marked by a continued commitment to the principles he defended throughout his career. His fidelity to Stoic ideals, his pursuit of justice, and his moderation in politics and personal life highlight him as an exceptional figure in the history of ancient Greece. Solon's legacy continues to inspire not only scholars and historians, but all those who seek to understand and promote justice and equality in their own communities. Solon's relevance to contemporary Stoic philosophy. Solon not only contributed to democracy, but also embodied many fundamental principles of Stoic philosophy, making him a relevant figure for the contemporary understanding of Stoicism. Stoic principles reflected in Solon. 1. Justice and equity. Solon emphasized the importance of justice in his reforms, reflecting the Stoic principle of living according to reason and equity. His commitment to equality before the law and the abolition of unfair privileges echoes the Stoic ideal of treating all individuals with dignity and respect. 2. Moderation and self-reliance. As a legislator, Solon promoted moderation in both politics and personal life, seeking to avoid extremes and promote a stable social balance. This Stoic value of moderation is essential to the realization of wisdom and virtue. 3. Resilience and acceptance. During his voluntary exile, Solon demonstrated resilience and acceptance of adverse circumstances, fundamental principles of Stoicism. His ability to distance himself from passions and conflicts reflects the Stoic practice of maintaining inner tranquility in the face of external difficulties. Contemporary impact. Solon's relevance to contemporary Stoic philosophy lies in his practical application of Stoic principles in politics and public life. He not only defended these principles in theory, but incorporated them into his actions as a legislator and statesman, demonstrating how Stoic philosophy can inform and inspire political and social practices. Solon of Athens left a lasting legacy in both global political history and contemporary Stoic philosophy. His democratic ideas helped shape political systems that value citizen participation and equality before the law. Furthermore, his life and actions exemplify the Stoic principles of justice, moderation, and resilience, offering a model for how the philosophy can be applied in practice to promote a lasting and sustainable common good. Conclusion. In this video, we explore the life and legacy of Solon of Athens, a statesman whose reforms marked the beginning of democracy in ancient Greece and profoundly influenced Western political and philosophical thought. Solon of Athens and Stoic philosophy are not just relics of the past, but sources of inspiration and guidance for contemporary challenges. In a world where justice, moderation, and citizen participation are fundamental to stability and equity, the teachings of Solon and the Stoic philosophers resonate deeply. Solon of Athens not only shaped the course of political history by laying the foundations of democracy, but he also exemplified the fundamental principles of Stoicism in his life and actions. His legacy resonates as a powerful reminder of the importance of justice, moderation, and wisdom in government and personal life. As we explore its lasting impact and contemporary relevance, we are reminded that the lessons of Solon and the Stoics continue to inspire and inform the quest for a more just and virtuous society. If you liked the video and share with us your desire to know more and more about the wise men who contributed to the history of the world, subscribe to our channel and follow our journey, unveiling philosophy and the magic of Stoic knowledge that surrounds it. Thank you and see you in the next video.